Hey guys, welcome to Lettuce Tree Farms. I'm Jeff Thaler, and today we're going to be talking about microgreens farming. So this video is going to be a little different than the last two. We're going to have some short sections, starting with a segment about our watering system and how we go about our daily watering for all the microgreens in our farm here. Then we're going to get into a few odds and ends about our growing process we haven't got to show you yet, and we'll do a deep dive finally into our facilities and end with our new shipping container farm construction. Alright, so we're going to start with our germination station here. This is our cart we have all of our patching materials on. As you can see, it's on wheels, so it moves out of the way. It's a very small growing area we work within, so space is valuable and storage is a creative feat most of the time. So check out how these guys have been doing overnight. Alright, so you can see here we have some peas up on the top that are germinating. You see those guys got stuck on top as a weight to prevent any of the little critters. We sometimes have mice that like to jump into our germination station with all the nice fresh seeds, and that prevents them from being able to lift up and get at the sunflowers that are underneath there. So you can see those sunflowers are just after seeding. Some of them have a few little cracks where they're opening up and starting to germinate. And then down here you can see the next level of sunflowers where they've actually fully germinated and pushed up. So this is 4 empty flats that are just stacked above them in order to have that weight we talked about, and you can see they've lifted it right up. Even the ones below have lifted up the flats above them that are full of soil because of how strong they actually are. So don't worry about squashing your micros. Give them that weight so the root can tap down in. Now we're going to get these guys misted and watered and put out into the actual growing space for their next stage of life.
I'm meant to ride this ocean, traveling in slow motion, paddling with no question, early morning with the sun, not yet burning, innocent. I try to be a good son, myself 100%.
Alright, so the pea shoots here you can see we got at another stage of development. We got basically a few little guys that have roots down and they're starting their initial stalks. That's these tiny little hooks you can see coming up here. So we want those guys to be a little taller before we actually take off any weight, so that they have the best possible chance of letting the root dive down in. So even though we typically will dome it, and we'll show you what that means in a second here, after this point for most plants, once they have a little vertical growth, we put a dome on it. This one for peas, we leave it, and for sunflowers really, we leave it an extra day in order to allow the roots to grow down in. Now doming it is what I did up here you saw before with these sunflowers. That's where after they've lifted up the flat above them and they've got a little vertical growth, you stick another microgreens flat on top of them upside down in order to give them a little more room to grow up but stay in a dark, humid space. Now after they're done being domed, you can see they've also lifted up the flat on top of them, and then they are even taller. What this process does is allows some of the shorter ones to catch up to the taller ones, evens out the growing height, and also allows a lot more of the seeds to fall off because they stay in the high humid area longer. So some of the other things we'll show you here is for our other crops we got developed. This is actually amaranth that is fully ready to go and come out into the germination shelf. Below it is, that looks like wasabi that has germinated well. Below that is our curled cress, and below that is our arugula. So that's what they look like once they've germinated and they are ready to come out of the germination hab into the actual growing area. So it looks like we don't have much available space, as is typically the problem here at Lettuce Tree Farms. We are filling up our growing space all the time, which is exactly why we had to build and are currently building our new shipping container farm site. So what we do is go a little vertical with it. This is part of our vertical farming initiative. We can actually get things up about 8 feet high. You can check that out up there. See what it looks like from above. One thing to take a note of is that some of the microgreen seeds germinate a lot slower than the others. Pea shoots of sunflowers, seed to finish in 10 days. It takes 10 days just for these cilantro seeds to germinate. So these have been in there for about 6 days now, and you can see there's a few of them that have actually germinated, but the majority of them are taking their sweet time. So sometimes you just got to give them a little bit longer. Alright, let's get to this watering.
I wanna reach that. It's somewhere inside. I wish I reached that. Skyline, skyline. I wanna reach that skyline. Skyline. I wish I reached that skyline. Skyline. I'm gonna reach that skyline. Skyline. Endless troubles to go through. They are strolling in the city. Daily struggle to be true. Betray authenticity.
Alright, so now that we got the watering done, we're going to get some soil made up so we can continue plantings and have things ready for the rest of the week. Organic sphagnum peat moss that we got from PVP Supplies out here in Ohio, and that goes through a 1/4-inch screen in order to take all the big stuff out. Big stuff gets dumped to the side. This is actually a large pile underneath this cubit here. I'm not sure if this is squash or what's going on, but this thing decided to live in the storage pile of soil we had because I forgot to cover it, and so we decided we're gonna let it live and improve it as best we can. So it looks like, yeah, it looks like we got some squash actually coming up all over the place. So since we didn't have any raised beds to put it in this year, it kind of made a raised bed into itself. But that's why we're pulling soil from underneath this whole garden space, because that's actually our reserve soil pack right there. So that also gets screened through because it's sitting out here, so there's a chance for other stuff to get in there. We don't want anything larger than a 1/4 inch to get into our microgreen soil. Alright, so this is our workstation here at Lettuce Tree Farms. We get all of our plantings and our harvestings done. So you can see the countertop we got on it is actually white PVC board. This gets sanitized several times a day with the hydrogen peroxide mix. And then once every 2 to 3 months we actually come by and bleach it so that it gets this nice white sheen and goes back to just like new. Behind we have our daily task list. You can see we got to feed fish, the germination station, watering, sweeping, and deliveries, planting, anything you have, and any other things that we like to communicate between me and the other team members and the volunteers. Underneath here we have flat storage for all of our clean microgreens flats. You saw how we wash them before, and that's where we store them. This pond liner flat keeps the soil that we use when we're planting from getting on our nice clean stuff, as well as anything below. And then down here we have actually our bulk seed storage. So there's our bulk peas and scales, bulk seed storage, and some other odds and ends that we use around the farm as well. Above here we have our actual harvesting station. So these grates allow airflow underneath. We have paper towels that we use and get put under the UV light for sanitation in order to have a surface the microgreens get put onto. A fan in the corner in order to dry the microgreens out. And then underneath here is actually a UV light, if you want to check that out. This guy right there is how we clean all of our greens whenever we do our plantings. So that provides a kill step and keeps things sanitary. So here at Lettuce Tree Farms, our microgreen shelves are custom built. We've been designing them for a few years now. Our first generation, we did a staggered top shelf so we could test angled lighting, and a straight bottom shelf with direct overhead lighting. We like the direct overhead better because staggered allowed microgreens to grow sideways, whereas if the lights are directly above, they go straight up. Our second generation shelf here, you can see we got even more levels on it, and they're a lot bigger. It's actually a bit cumbersome to build, and the weight of it over time meant that the corners started dropping, and one corner gets water while the other one doesn't because they're not level anymore. So for our third generation, we made it small enough for a single person to build and take down, and then we put in these self-leveling corners so you can actually adjust and manage exactly which corner is the high one or the low one, so you can know which way it drains or have a perfectly flat level surface for your microgreens to grow on. Alright, so these are our newest shelf design going into our new shipping container farm for microgreens farming. And you can see they have the same brackets to hold each shelf level that can adjust each corner just the same as our last generation. But the supports are a lot thinner, they take up less space, they're a lot stronger so we can get more shelves in the same height. And we got them on fixed wheels so that we can pack them into the shipping container and only need one aisleway between 5 of these shelves for the future microgreen shipping container farm for Lettuce Tree Farms. Okay, so last thing about our shelves here is we got these wire cages. Just like any and every farm has to deal with pests, we want to make sure we're keeping our greens protected from anything but the humans that are harvesting. So that's what those cages are for. Moving over here, we got our water set up. So we actually just have hose water coming in from the city, from our standard building line. Then that goes through a boogie brew system here, which is actually a dechlorinator and defluorinator. Then it goes up to our split valve, where the dechlorinated water is what we use for all of our irrigation as well as our watering by hand. The irrigation system you see is a simple 4-way digital, runs on batteries, so we don't have to worry about plugging in or anything like that. You can use this in your garden or in your farm if you have a smaller operation like we do. And this works out really well for twice daily watering of all the microgreens. Okay, so our irrigation system goes from that small manifold over there with the 4 valves over to the 1/2-inch irrigation piping that's just hung up behind here. Then we got our 1/4-inch irrigation line branching off of that. Each one comes to its own valve for each shelf section that we can turn on and off or adjust the amount. And each shelf has 2 inlets on opposite corners of this 1/4-inch irrigation, just tucked right behind a little screw there in the corner. That allows the water to get down in and do an even flooding underneath all of the microgreens flats. So the lights that we use here are Barina shop lights. They're actually not made specifically for growing, and which makes them a little bit cheaper to buy, which is why we use them. So they're about $15 for a light. We get them in packs of 6. And they have 2 strips of white LEDs. The red and blues I find are difficult to see what kind of color you have on your actual microgreen leaves. So white light is better to work with. And they are extremely bright, and the kits come with all the connections you need in order to link them together in lines, in rows, or in series. So we got them for all of our microgreen shelves to even all out our lighting. And we actually saw an increased growth when we got these newer, brighter lights in there. So we ended up turning that into a large fixture you can see over here. That is now growing our basil and some of our house plants that we have for air filtration. Now that light fixture there is 6 of the 5,000 lumen Barina LEDs, and at half the distance, it's the same lumens intensity as a 1,000-watt HPS light. All right, welcome to our new shipping container construction site for for our new microgreens and urban farm here in Cleveland. So Lettuce Tree Farms has been developing this system for about 2.5 years now. It's been all in my head, on paper, and in CAD drawings for that entire time, so it's really exciting to see it come to life right before our eyes here. You can see we have two 40-foot shipping containers with a 16-foot space between them, and then 8 foot off the front of those we have a 20-foot shipping container. Over top of the 20-foot and one of the 40-foots we have a full 600 square foot deck, and covering the entire span and the entire deck we have a 32-foot wide by 54-foot long high tunnel that will actually be covered in the same greenhouse material, allowing light to come in and illuminate the entire thing. So let's take you on in and give you a little tour of our construction and show you what it will become here in the future. So we're going to have our front door about here, small metal roof going up over top, and this is our expansion space. We haven't done anything with this container. It's actually a great view to see what the other one looked like when we got it, because it looks very different now. So just the standard wooden floors, banged up metal walls like you would get from any used shipping container. That we're using for storage right now and might go and become a new microgreens farm in the future if we need even more growing space, because the whole reason for building this thing was because we filled out all of our growing space in our little research hab in the warehouse. So in between the space here, this will be entirely covered by the hoop house, heated in the winter, cooled in the summer. We're gonna have evaporative coolers and AC units running here. And that will keep this between 15 and 20 degrees colder than the outside temperature, allowing us to do a lot of different crops you wouldn't typically be able to do during the hot season. And then we'll be able to hopefully continue all of our growing throughout the entire cold Cleveland winter, because the insulation we'll have here will be mainly from the air gap between two different layers of that greenhouse material plastic. We'll have a good 6 inches gap between those layers, and if we find that we need even more insulation, we might actually put a third layer of that greenhouse material up in order to keep the heat in. So moving over here, we have the container that will become our shipping container for microgreens farming. If you want to step on in, you can see the floor has been insulated and waterproofed, as have the walls and the ceilings. Everything here actually has at least 1 inch of insulation on every side. We have 2 inches on the floor, 1.5 inches on the walls, and 4 inches on the ceiling. That is closed cell foam hard insulation board, framed with wood along the inside of the container, and then painted with waterproof basement painting for the ceiling and walls. And the floor paint is actually Tremco roofing sealant. So we've been allowing it to off-gas because it does have a little bit of fume that happens after you first put it down. It's been off-gassing for about 3 weeks now. We're going to give it another couple of weeks before we actually start building this out. And this is where all of our microgreens will be grown in the future. So super waterproof floor, we can hose down the entire thing to sanitize, completely decontaminate, and make sure that everything is perfectly clean before we get growing, or in the event of any contamination issues in the future. And this will actually be even more climate controlled than the rest of the space, because we're going to have this completely maintained at around 70 degrees all year long, no matter what the conditions outside are. And that will keep our microgreens as happy as possible. So moving on upstairs, in order to keep with our elements of vertical farming, we had to increase the height of everything here and put a new growing space on top of our shipping containers. So that is our deck system we have built up here. We actually cantilever the deck over the edge of the shipping container 2 feet on that side, so that it's 10 feet wide, and that extra 2 feet over the entire 40-foot span really makes a huge difference when it comes to the amount of square footage you have to work with. So between this whole span here and then the L section that we have going around onto the 20-foot container, there's actually almost 600 square feet of available deck space that gets relentless and fantastic sunlight all day long, every day, while we have some really predictable shading areas down below. And that's how we're basically going to manage our growing systems and our growing spaces, so that we have great sunlight up here, a little bit of shaded areas down there, hanging baskets, things going all the way up to the ceiling with vines, and just greenery pretty much covering head to toe this entire space. So we're excited to get everything going And once that's all up and greened out, we will bring you guys back in for another tour and show you how everything's looking. One final thing about our shipping container farm construction here is that we are actually going to make this as sustainable as possible by trying to collect our own rainwater, produce our own biofuels and natural gas from composting in an anaerobic environment. But we are also going to be having wind turbines and solar panels for our off-grid power generation here. So this large post right here, you recently talked to the contractor about leaving tall because that is going to be the mount for our vertical-oriented wind turbine. And then on the other decking system over top of the outside shipping container, we're going to have all of our solar panels. So that will lead into our actual electrical hub in the little 20-foot container, and all of that will allow us to operate even in the middle of winter when we don't have a lot of sun. We do have a lot of wind here in Cleveland, so that will keep us going sustainably all year long. Thanks for joining us at Lettuce Tree Farms today for seeing these last few odds and ends around microgreens farming. If you like the video, please remember to subscribe and hit that like button. Also, join us anytime we're dropping new videos. That subscription will allow you to get a notification. We're going to be dropping a video about every week here. So look out for more information on microgreens, urban farming, and sustainable farming in general. Anyway, one last thing here. I think we haven't talked much about our aquaponics systems yet. So we do have 30 yellow perch in here, and we're going to be going into a full dive into our aquaponics setup and what the plans are for that in the future. But look for a future video about aquaponics. And anyway, thanks for joining us at Lettuce Tree Farms here. Stay well.